Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight's Wednesday night means another halacha and Tanya. For a few weeks we didn't learn. Before that, we were learning the dinam of meat and milk, and we're generally learning the laws of separation of meat and milk, how long you have to wait, and what you have to do between meat and milk, and between milk and meat, and all the various different dinam. But now we're going to go back to the actual practical dinam when things get mixed up in a kitchen, meat and milk and things like that. So just to recap a few major things that we need to understand to continue, and that is, the Torah says 3 times you cannot cook a goat in its mother's milk. So the fact that the Torah says the same exact pasuk 3 times teaches us you're not allowed to eat meat and milk, you're not allowed to benefit from meat and milk, and you're not allowed to cook meat and milk. Even if you're not planning to eat it, just to cook meat and milk together, you're getting a biblical transaction. You're transgressing a negative commandment in the Torah. Okay? Now, things which are only rabbinic, like for instance, meat and chicken, or things like that, which could only be rabbinic. So then it's only forbidden to eat. It's not forbidden to cook or to benefit from. Now, when we say, now this is what we're starting today. When you say the halacha that you can't cook meat and milk together, it doesn't only mean actual meat and milk together. But even if you cook milk in a container that has a taste of meat, or you cook meat in a vessel that has a taste of milk, that's also biblically cooking meat and milk together. In other words, let me explain like this. Is a very important din in this whole bunch of halachas that we're going to be learning. There is something called mamoshes be'en. Be'en means something substantial. You have a pot, there's some meat left in it. That's called substance, be'en. There's something visible to the eye. There's something substantial in the pot. What happens if you cook chicken soup, so it's fleshik, and then you washed out the container? You washed it out very well. There is no be'en, there is no meat left inside the pot. Nevertheless, as we know, and we're going to learn more details about this, the pot is still a meat pot. Why is the meat a meat pot? Because when you cook meat in a pot, the taste of the meat becomes absorbed within the walls of the vessel. The meat becomes absorbed within the walls of the vessel, and there is a meat taste there. And if it's within 24 hours of the time you cooked it, then it's what's called a fresh taste of meat. And therefore, if somebody would be cooking milk in such a pot, there would actually be transgressing meat and cooking of meat and milk together. So if somebody has a pot and they just cooked meat in it, and they cleaned the pot spotlessly, and 10 hours later, they cooked milk in that pot. So the din is they transgress the sin of cooking meat and milk together, even though there's no substantial meat in the pot. There's only absorbed taste of meat in the pot, but the fact that it's still within 24 hours. So the taste of meat which is absorbed within the walls of the pot, is a fresh taste of meat. Therefore, when you cook meat and put milk in there now, you are transgressing the sin of meat and milk together. Now, what happens to the food? So if you cook meat, or let's say you cook milk in a meat pot that is clean, but it was used within 24 hours. So then halachically, we know that meat and milk become nullified 1 in 60. You have 1 drop of milk falls into 60 times the amount of chicken soup, it's nullified. If it's 59 times the drop of milk, the whole thing is trace. So now you have a pot that has absorbed within it taste of meat. And now you're cooking dairy in the pot. And we learned there's meat taste coming out into the milk. Now the din is, if in the milk is 60 times the amount of meat which is absorbed within the pot, the milk is kosher because it's nullified. There's one problem, halacha says, we don't know. Because we don't know how much meat became absorbed within the pot of the vessel. And therefore, we have to assume that the whole wall of the pot, bottom, sides of the pot, is like meat. It's a full amount of meat. And rarely are you going to have 60 times in the milk, 60 times against the taste of meat, which is absorbed within the walls of the pot. So therefore, number one, if they cooked milk in a meat pot that's clean and wasn't used for 24 hours, the milk is treif, the pot is treif, because now you have milk back into the wall of the pot, and now the wall of the pot has milk and meat together in it. So the pot became treif. So everything is treif in that case. What happens if it wasn't used for 24 hours? If the pot wasn't used for 24 hours for milk, for meat, it was used Sunday morning for meat. And now Tuesday morning, by mistake, you cooked cheese in it or milk in it. So the din is like this. After 24 hours, the taste of meat absorbed within the wall of the pot, in Hebrew it's called pogum, which in English means blemished. It's not a pure taste of meat. After 24 hours, that's what the Chazal say. After 24 hours, the absorbed taste, that means there's nothing mamoshes, there's no ba'en, there's nothing substantial. The only problem is meat that was absorbed within the walls of the pot. So the Chachamim established that after 24 hours, the taste of the meat that's in the pot is blemished and it's not meat. Therefore, when you cook milk or dairy in a meat pot that's clean and wasn't used for 24 hours, the halacha is the milk is good. The macaroni and cheese that you made is kosher. You have to kosher the pot because the pot has meat in it and the pot has milk in it. So you have to kosher the pot. Why? Well, why don't we say it's just blemish to make the pot now dairy? Because the Chacham came along and said like this. If we're going to go with that logic, then technically I would be able to have one pot. Sunday morning cook meat, Tuesday morning cook milk, Thursday morning cook meat, Friday, after 24 hours cook. So I'll end up with one pot, use it for meat and milk. Yes, I'll clean it well between. But I'll use, so the Chacham said, no, that's no good. You can't do that. You're not allowed to take a pot that wasn't used for 24 hours for meat and cook milk in it. You're not allowed to. We said, though, if by mistake it was done, so then the food is good. The food is kosher. The problem is you have to kosher the pan because now the pan has milk in it. And the same thing is in reverse. If you have a milk pot and you cook meat in it and all those things. So in that case, the food is kosher, by the way, because it's after 24 hours. But if somebody took a pot that was clean within 24 hours, and a meat pot that was used that day within 24 hours, and you cook milk in it, the milk is treif, the pot is treif, everything's treif. You can't eat the milk. Not only that, accidentally granted, but you transgress the aved of cooking meat and milk together. Plus, because you cooked meat and milk together, you're not allowed to benefit from it because it's biblical. Not chicken, but if it's biblical meat, then you're not allowed to benefit from it. You can't eat it. You can't even benefit. You have to throw it into the garbage. You can't even give it to your housekeeper. You can't give it to another non-Jewish person. It's forbidden to benefit from. You can't even give it to your own animal. Because then you're benefiting, you're feeding your animal. What you have to do is dump it in the basura, in the garbage. You can't do anything else with it. Now this is a
Rabbi Shusterman, but you said that if it was used, if it was not used,
what?
If it wasn't used for 24 hours, but the pot is dirty,
okay,
and by mistake.
Right now to that din. Exactly.
Okay.
Until now, we spoke when it's completely clean. If you remember at the beginning today, we mentioned that that it becomes blended after 24 hours is only the absorbed taste in the wall. Only when it's absorbed in the wall, then it becomes blemished. Substantial meat or milk, no matter how many days it's there, does not become nullified. Does not become blemished. So if somebody cooks macaroni and cheese in a filthy meat pot, it could be, you didn't use it for 10 weeks. But if the pot is dirty, that there's meat in it, residue of meat in it, then the food is treif. It's a given, you have to kasher the pot. Now, by the way, if the pot is not kasherable, then you have to throw it out because you can't kasher it, and it needs to be kasher. So you're going to have to throw it out. You can't do anything else with it. Not kasherable means it's a material that, like for instance, ceramic is not a kasherable material. Porcelain is not a kasherable material. Anything that's, synthetic stuff, basically, we're machmed that it's not kasherable. The only time a pot is kasherable is if it's all metal. And any time a pot is coated with the covering of a coating, so then you can't kasher it because of the coating. So bottom line is, any pot which is not clean, it doesn't mean how it wasn't used. It's going to be anything the opposite gender. Eat the milk to meat. You can't. It's not going to be kosher. Yeah, and you're not going to be able. In order to kasher the pot, you're going to have to scrape it until it's spotlessly clean, even if it's metal, not coated. You're going to have to clean the pot spotlessly, and then you're going to be able to kasher it. But without that, you can't kasher it. And that's why all the way at the beginning, we said that poskim right, that kitchens that are not very clean is very questionable in the kashrus. I'll give you another example of this din that we just learned. Okay? What happens if somebody baked a roast in an oven? Okay? And let's say it was not covered. Tuesday morning, they baked a roast in the oven or any other flation food. And within 24 hours later, they baked a cheesecake or they baked the lasagna, whatever, something which is dairy. So then the food is treif because, again, even though there's no meat in the oven now, you took it out. So even if the oven is clean, and you took out the roast, but it's still within 24 hours of the time that you used it last for heat, and now you made a lasagna in the oven, in the same oven, without koshering the oven, the lasagna is treif, and the oven needs to be kosher. What happens if you bake the roasted in oven on Tuesday morning, and Thursday afternoon you made a cheesecake? So then if the oven is clean, because it's after 24 hours from the taste of the meat absorbed within the walls of the oven, so your cheesecake is good. But you have to kosher your oven, because now your oven has a taste of meat and a taste of milk in it. But the food is kosher. That's why, like we said, you have to be very careful. If somebody is going to, okay, we'll discuss very briefly the din, but if you're going to bake chicken in an oven or meat in an oven on Friday, and it's uncovered, and later you're going to bake a parva cake in the oven, because there's a fresh taste of meat now in the cake, even though you still can't eat if the oven's clean. You cannot eat that cake, even though it's 100% parva. You cannot eat that cake together with milk. You can right before, right after, but not together with milk. Why?
Before 24 hours.
I'm saying if the oven was used for meat within 24 hours, and then you bake the parva cake, and then like we gave it last time, we said the example. Friday morning, you bake your roast or chicken. And then Friday afternoon, you have time, you want to bake a cake for coffee Shabbos morning. So that cake, even though it's parv, so your oven's not treif, you bake something parv in. But the fact that it was within 24 hours, so we're machmir in halacha that you can't eat the cake directly with milk, right? You could eat it right before, right after, and you don't become fleishik from it. The problem would be if your oven is not clean and the pan of the cake touched the walls of the oven, which were filthy with meat, then you might make your fleishik 6 hours. Okay, so that's basically the concept of this din that we're learning. We're going to continue in a second. Okay, but what's interesting, if I made a lasagna in a fleishik oven after 24 hours and the oven's clean, I can eat the lasagna, but the oven needs to be kosher. The same din is going to apply. And this is a much more common problem that happens much more often. And that is what happens if I'm making chicken soup, and by mistake, I took a dairy spoon and stirred the chicken soup. Or by mistake, I took a dairy ladle and took out some soup while it was on the fire. So again, based on what we said, now we can understand what the din is. If that spoon wasn't used for dairy for 24 hours, so the spoon then is not really dairy, it's a blemish taste. Therefore, the chicken soup is kosher because there's no milk coming into the soup because it's a blemish taste.
Clean spoon.
If it's a clean spoon, I'm going to say that in a second. But if it's within 24 hours, no, but I'm saying 1 second. But the spoon needs to be kosher. The spoon has to be kosher because now you have a dairy spoon that has meat in it now. Okay, now, if the spoon was used within 24 hours and it's clean, now the question is like this. Is the chicken soup going to be kosher or not? So again, we have in the dairy spoon, there's an absorption of milk. So therefore, what do? You need 60 times the size of the spoon in the chicken soup. Because again, we don't know how much milk is absorbed in the spoon. Like we said before, we don't know how much is absorbed in the pot. So therefore, you have to consider the whole spoon milchik, that is dairy. Therefore, if you mix meat and milk together, so if in the chicken soup, it's a large pot of chicken soup, that you would be able to put in 60 spoons, then the chicken soup is kosher. But if you wouldn't be able to make shishim against it, 60 against it, so then the din is the whole soup is also treif.
How do you measure a spoon?
You put the spoon into the pot and you see, figure 60. So if you have, let's say, a 12-quart pot, a 10-quart pot, you can assume it's time to 60 times the amount. 60, you'd be able to, you'd have to be able to put in 60 spoonfuls. There's 60,
Spoonfuls or
not no,
spoons?
60 spoons
Okay.
in 60 times the amount. Now, if the spoon is dirty, then even if it was used within 24 hours, after 24 hours, it's a problem. And I can tell you, not once, not twice, not 10 times, much, much more. People are cooking, and the same time, Erev Shabbos usually is when the kitchen shilas come up. They're cooking chicken soup, and they're making parva vegetables. This happens many, many times. And without thinking, you just stirred the chicken soup, and then without thinking, you took the spoon now and you mixed the vegetables. So it's mamish fleishiks. Of course, we're talking about hot. Of course, the soup is hot. It's on the fire. You're cooking soup, and you stir the soup, and you just put it into a parva pot full of vegetables. So those vegetables are mamish fleishik. Unless if in the vegetables you have 60 times the amount of the spoon, which you probably are not going to have. So then the whole, your parva vegetable stew, whatever you want to call it, became fleishik. Somebody is cooking parva vegetable soup at the same time with chicken soup, and by mistake, you take the chicken spoon and mix the vegetable soup with it. Again, it's hot, and it's used that day. Plus, there's chicken on the soup and the spoon. So everything's going to become. It's not going to become treif. The vegetable soup is going to be fleishiks. That's all. To the extent, by the way, that you probably need to wait 6 hours. Because there's taste of meat in the vegetable soup. If there's taste of meat in the vegetable soup, then you're going to have to wait 6 hours.
But it's more than 60.
I'm saying if it's not more than 60. If it's not more than 60, you're going to have to wait 6 hours. But these are very, very practical cases that come up on a daily basis. Okay? But what people do sometimes, and this they're also not allowed to do. I'm saying when throwing out food. Sometimes somebody tells me they use a hot fleishik spoon to mix something milchik. But the spoon wasn't used for 24 hours. So right away they tell me, I threw out the food already. Tell me what to do with the pot and the spoon. I say, why did you throw out the food? If the spoon or the knife or the fork, when it's hot, wasn't used for 24 hours, then your food is kosher. Yes, you have to kosher the spoon. But why are you throwing out the food? Another interesting point, what happens if I'm cooking chicken soup? I take a dairy spoon, okay, that was used within 24 hours. But it was still used within 24 hours. And I don't have 60 times in the soup against 60 spoons. So we said the food is treif. The pot needs to be kashered, and the spoon needs to be kosher. Because you have a mixture of meat and milk, fresh tastes. You're cooking chicken soup. You take a spoon, which was used that day for hot, not cold, hot dairy. So now you're mixing meat and milk together, and it's a fresh taste. So therefore, the din is the food is straight, the spoon is straight, and the pot needs to be covered, kosher. What happens if the spoon wasn't used for 24 hours, the dairy spoon, and you stirred by mistake chicken soup? So the chicken soup is kosher. The pot is kosher because the pot only has a blemish taste of meat, of milk in it, but the spoon needs to be kosher because it's a dairy spoon that was mixed with meat. So it needs to be kosher the same way. But then sometimes you have to, sometimes the food is straight and you have to kosher the spoon and the pot. Sometimes the food is kosher, the pot is kosher. All you're going to have to do is kosher the spoon. The same din applies, by the way. This happens also, and God, there's a lot of. I'm not saying you shouldn't ask a shaila because we're just learning today the general concepts of what the dinim of the kitchen that people should be aware of asking questions. Because there's a difference. Let's say you're cooking a roast in the oven, and it's tightly covered, and then you put something milchik, it might change the din because it's covered. So, there's a lot of dinim that you need to know in addition to what we're learning. Today, we're just learning the general dinim of what needs to be done and where you have a shaila in the kitchen. The same thing happens very often. And like I said, it happens a lot with husbands and kids or housekeepers. Somebody by mistake warms up a dairy pizza in a meat microwave. It happens very often. They forgot that it's supposed to. So you have a dairy microwave, you have a meat microwave. By mistake, somebody heated up a pizza that it got hot. If it didn't get hot, that's not an issue. The pizza got hot, and you just reheated it in a halachic microwave. That could be an issue. If the pizza is not covered, what was the microwave used last for halachics? Did the microwave now become milchik? These are all issues that can come up. Sometimes you can have a parva pot that you take a dairy spoon that was used that day for meat. For milk, a dairy spoon that you used for milk, and then you stirred the parva food in a parva pot. It could be that pot now becomes milchik because you don't have 60 times the spoon. If you have 60 times the spoon, then everything is fine. Everything's parva. But usually you're not going to have 60 times the spoon because 60 spoons is a lot. That's the fact. It's just a lot. Okay, we're going to leave it here. We're going to go to Tanya.